Welcome to the ride with Wild Wayne Cartwright, an exciting thrill ride through the wonderful world of HBCU athletics. Before our trip begins, let's set a few ground rules. First, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Second, hit the like button. Third, please be sure to tell someone else about this show. Now that we've got these things out of the way, it's time for our journey to begin. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your ride.
Well, it is a great Wednesday evening, everybody in HBCU land, and welcome back to a season-ending edition of The Ride with Wild Wayne Cartwright, and I'm joined tonight by my special guest. You know him, you've heard him across the airwaves. I'm so pleased to be joined by none other than HBCUGo lead commentator, James Hadnot. What's going on, my brother?
Nothing much. Everything is everything. Another day. We're happy to be blessed, happy to be here. And so God woke me up this morning, so we are all good. And I really appreciate you having me on the show and really ready to rock and roll. So thank you so much.
Yeah, man. It's great. It's great that you're on. And, everybody that's watching, make sure that you like the stream all night and, let's have a good time. So first and foremost, before I get started, I have to say something. I made a promise to my nursing staff yesterday. I had a colonoscopy yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And everything is great. Thank God. But I had to make this special PSA, and I wanted to say that for all people that are over the age of 45, like I am, make sure that you do your due diligence and get screened. Get yourself checked out, man. Get that colonoscopy. I mean, make sure you take care of yourself, man, because health is truly wealth. So definitely wanted to put that awareness out there. So, all right, now that we're ready to roll, man, let's get into it, man. So, man, as we get rolling into the off season, so we're gonna cover all the teams tonight, everybody. So, anything you want to talk about, put it in the comments. Any questions in the comments? James has been to a lot of these campuses in the SWAC. He called these games, so he's gonna be able to talk about it. But, man, let's talk about some of the coaching changes first, all right? Let's start with the one up top, man. Terrence Graves gets a 1-6 start. And you were down there at Southern for their homecoming, man, and now Marshall Faulk comes in. Talk about it. What do you think about this?
I think for Coach Graves, it was tough because, his quarterback goes out in the beginning of the year, and it's very difficult to win anything without a QB. And so after, getting – to the SWAC championship game last year, Zay T-Set was fantastic, but they bring a couple quarterbacks in. T-Set goes to Grambling, and so now you don't have a signal caller, and then your signal caller goes down early in the year versus Mississippi Valley State, and they just could never get going from there. And his calling card is obviously, just kind of line play, and that was something that they struggled with throughout the year. So Marshall Faulk, obviously coming from Colorado under Coach Sanders, and now kind of bringing this, his offensive mentality, his offensive acumen, as well as just his championship zeal. That's going to be something fun to see down in Southern. And like you said, you talk about atmosphere. It was super fun being down there despite, the final score. And also, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but, Tremaine Jackson and what he said at the end of the game, he said, we're not that same Prairie View. We're not that team anymore. And he said he wants it to be a cold day in hell before somebody else schedules them for a homecoming. So that kind of speaks to what's upcoming for Prairie View after they had such a successful season.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And then also in the SWAC, man, FAMU, James Colsey, he lasted 2 seasons. But, man, what's real crazy is two losses to Mississippi Valley State on that ledger, man. And that led to his dismissal. And then Quinn Gray comes back home, man, from Albany State. So what are your thoughts about, FAMU? Because I know you called the game. You called 2 games down there, actually.
Yeah, and I actually called that game last year versus Mississippi Valley State. And so that was Coach Coles is a great person. He's a great coach. He's a winner. He's a national champion, at Florida State as a player. It's just that seat got hot real quick. When you have such a long winning streak and you're coming off of a national championship, and also just that FAMU heritage, Rattler country knows what they want. They want wins. They want to be playing for the Celebration Bowl. And to have some of those losses, and then some of the home losses, they were gaudy losses, right? Alabama State this year and North Carolina Central. Those were just losses that when you look back on them, they're just ones that you just can't have. And even though R.J. Johnson, as the season went on, actually turned out to be a pretty good quarterback once he kind of figured things out after not starting for a whole year, the time just kind of ran out for him. And so for Coach Gray, having a great year at Albany State, getting to the quarterfinals in Division II, he told me at Media Day when I talked to him this year, he knew what was required. They were picked to finish first in the SIAC for the third straight year, but they finally got the job done. Isaiah Knowles is one of the best kept secrets in all of HBCU football at the quarterback position at Albany State. So I'm really excited for him and what he was able to do down there at the QB position. And so we'll see. I know there's buzz about, Coach Gray and going back home. And so we'll see what kind of happens.
Yeah, man. And then we keep it moving forward, man. So Hampton, this was your first call of the season, man, where Hampton played at Jackson State. And Coach Trenton Boykin, the first season he was an interim, and then he was the full-time head coach this year. And, it went from 5-7 to 2-10. And then in comes Van Malone, who's a well-traveled assistant. He was a former DC at SMU. Most recently, he was a assistant head coach, defensive assistant there at Kansas State. So, talk about Hampton, man.
And for Hampton, early on in the year, they had Jackson State up against the ropes. And that's the crazy thing about that contest, right? It's how things can kind of be here and there. And obviously, Jackson State showed their championship zeal by coming out victorious in that game. But for Coach Boykin, he wanted to run the ball, and we run into another situation and with the quarterback position, right? You had Isaiah Freeman coming from Langston coming up, starting. You had Braden Davis from Syracuse, a former 4-star coming in. And that's that position that you have to get right. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are. We saw it with R.J. Johnson and Coach Colsey at FAMU, kind of that struggle and not really be able to get things going. And then we saw it at Hampton the same way, right? And so if you don't get that quarterback position right and you're a starting head coach or an early head coach, you're kind of in no man's land if things don't go well. And depending on not necessarily the coaching staff, but depending on the administration and how much length they're going to give you, how much leeway they're going to give you, that's really kind of where it shakes out. And so for Coach Boykin, he had the rushing attack. That was what he kind of hung his hat on, and they were good rushing while he was coaching that position, and then also kind of coming into this year. It just, again, kind of just didn't work out. So we'll see what Hampton is able to do. As we're going to get into Howard, I'll kind of follow you up real quick. With Coach Larry Scott being out, he's going to Auburn to coach a position group there. But they got the monkey off their back, beating Hampton, this year for the first time. And so that's one of those, Super Bowls is very similar to the AD, Gary Davis for Howard told us. He was like, it's very similar to Ohio State and Michigan, right? Yeah, obviously, we want to win the championship. We want to win the MEAC, but we got to win this game too. Like this game is almost as important as well, and they hadn't been able to win it. So Coach Scott was able to do that. Obviously, not able to kind of get a MEAC championship again. And so interested to see what that position or who takes over that role, because it's not an easy job at Howard just because of all that's required. Those are really, really good students. And in some other places, it's not necessarily football comes first, but at Howard, academics are always going to come first. And
right.
It's not to say that the caliber of player you can get is not the same as some of the other schools, because you're going to have good athletes, you're going to have good students, good young men. But that's a place where I'm excited to see who can kind of bring, again, some success, because Coach Scott was successful there. It wasn't like he was not a successful coach. He went on his own terms, unlike some of the other coaches that we talked about. So it's very intriguing to see. That's an intriguing position, and we'll see who's going to take that over.
Yeah, and I'll add this about Hampton. It's a really tough place to try to win in the climate of the CAA. Playing some of those teams that they played, they're playing. You're playing Monmouth. You play Villanova. Look, Villanova's still playing in the FCS playoffs. You're playing Elon. They played Elon. They played some real tough, really where the season really went left for them. Now, you said you called the first game of the season when they played Jackson State, but then they followed it up with a real stinker against Elizabeth City State at home. They won that game, but then the next one, they went out there and they laid an egg late in the game against North Carolina A&T, and they never recovered, really. Even though they beat Norfolk State, which is another one of their rivals in the Battle of the Bay, it was just tough sledding the whole way. And then also for Larry Scott, man, is a true gentleman, class guy. I enjoy talking to him every single Monday on the MEAC coaches calls. He had talked about how difficult it could be with the climate. You talked about it with recruiting. He said that a lot of the transfer portal people that they tend to go for were those grad transfers. And it made a little bit of the waters a little bit tough to navigate. But Larry Scott did get him to a Celebration Bowl. He did a few good things for him, and he's going to definitely be successful. So we'll see what happens. There's been a little bit of rumors about maybe Dr. Alvin Parker maybe coming over to be the head coach at Howard, but we'll see. But those are the coaching changes for now, and that's at the FCS level. There's a couple other ones that we know about, like, Teddy Keaton out at Clark Atlanta, a few of the others, but we'll continue on. All right. Now we go to the MEAC, man. And we talk about, we'll work our way up. So let's talk about Norfolk State. Michael Vick, first year. Those guys, they go 1-11. And the thing that was so crazy about this team all year, and here I'll pull up, this is what they had, in their summary here. Remember the very big game, the very first game where they had ESPN, there. They had First Take there. Everything was high expectations. And they started Israel Carter at quarterback, and everything was a struggle. And then the overtime win, the one win that they had, who would have thought, the Battle of the States against Virginia State. But you look all the way through this thing, James. Sacred Heart, Wagner, Hampton, these are games that they had leads in, games that they could not finish. They could not execute. There were penalties, key turnovers. They eventually went to Otto Coons, who got the offense going. And then Otto Coons went out with a career-ending injury. Now, I mean career-ending, his Norfolk State career-ending injury against North Carolina Central. The results were definitely could have been so much, much better. I honestly would think that they could have won probably 5 of these if they would have been able to handle things situational wise. But there were problems just with execution across the board. And Michael Vick, as I switch back, Michael Vick, he said, I'm tired of singing the same old song. I'm tired of us shooting ourselves in the foot every single week. So they did come out with a few second team all MEAC, selections, but this was a year, man, 1-11. If you had it on your bingo card, congrats. So your thoughts about Norfolk State?
I mean, the tough part about it is, right, you get a team, first-year head coach, first-time head coaching, first-time coaching period, right? And you are in games. Every coach says it, whether they're going from Division II to Division I, whether they're going level to level, team to team. When you have a new group, you have to learn how to win, right? It doesn't just kind of happen. And so adversity is a part of every season. Coach Chinnis Berry talks about it over the course of last year, the adversity that they did not go through and how it kind of hurt them in the Celebration Bowl and how they went through obviously lots of adversity in the Celebration Bowl this year. Yeah. They were able to come out victorious. And so I see on that graphic that you just showed 6 games that are one possession games, right? And so you mentioned potentially winning 5, maybe 5 more games. But when you're in games, that's all you can ask for early on. Obviously, you want to win every game you play, right? Every time you strap up that helmet, every time you put on those pads, you want to win the game. But when you're also trying to learn how to win, you're trying to learn how to finish games, whether it be as a coach, as a player. This is all an adverse kind of learning experience. And so my excitement is to see what happens next year with the guys that are going to be coming back. Obviously, with HBCU football, we know there's so much turnover. There are transfers here, transfers there, guys coming in, guys coming out. And so who comes back and how do they take all those experiences from the year prior to the upcoming year? Because I know we're going to get into the SWAC. and we're going to talk a little bit, about Alabama A&M and some of these other schools, right? But I've seen this already, with Sam Shade going back to his time at Miles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their first year wasn't that good, right? Their first year at Miles, I think they only won 2 games. And
1-9.
And then 2 years later, they win the SIAC. And so that's not to say, I'm Norfolk State fans, I'm looking at the crystal ball that potentially could be the case. I know you guys are hoping that's the case. But I say that to say that it is possible because if you're in games, you just have to figure out what's going to make the difference in those games the next time you get there. So that's kind of my takeaway on Norfolk State.
Yeah. And, we'll also see with Michael Vick, we'll see what he does with his staff in year 2, because that's something that he's also got to kind of work with. But one season under his belt, we'll see what goes, we'll see what he does in recruiting. And, the last thing I'll say too, man, expectations were high. Some of it was maybe a little unfair. And, they had high attendance. And then once they got to that last home game, man, people had fallen off that wagon real quick. So we'll see what he does for a follow-up. I believe in Mike Vick. I think he's got a great chance and great potential. So we'll see. Now we switch to Baltimore and the Morgan State Bears. And Coach Damon Wilson completed his 4th season. And defensively, these guys were really, really good again. Led by Eric Hunter, who is probably, I'm not even going to say probably, I'm almost sure that guy's going to get drafted as a linebacker. Tall guy, lean, physical, run sideline to sideline. Their defense was really good all year. Him, Eric Hunter, Blanche Gold, real good. Lance Benden, and those two corners, Jaden Carter and Hiroshi Carr. These are guys that you heard their names called a lot. And then also Raymond Moore is a quarterback that they can possibly build on here in the future. He was the rookie of the year in the MEAC. Now, the thing that Morgan State had is a little bit of the same thing that they had from years past. Now, here's their schedule and what they had. These guys, they had problems with turning the ball over and also finishing. And also they had too many moments, where their offense went stale, right? Now, the game against Howard, that was a game that they had back and forth, but they had a lead in the 4th quarter. The game against South Carolina State, they had a big 4th quarter. They were down big in that game. But everybody saw that Thursday nighter or that Friday nighter at Delaware State. Remember that game? That was a real, real hard-hitting, tough game.
Yeah.
And that was a game where they missed a field goal on the very last play of regulation, right? But the thing for Damon Wilson is, the question has always been, when is the offense going to get going, and when is the offense going to be consistent enough to carry and travel it through? So they were 4-8 this year, and they won just that one game against Norfolk State in league play. And, as I switch back here, the thing for Morgan State now is this is could be Damon Wilson's last shot at it next year. Your thoughts about Morgan State?
I think Eric Hunter is, as you said, one of the best defensive players, not only in the MEAC, not only in HBCU football, but just kind of in FCS football, period. Mm-hmm. And so when you have an anchor like that, obviously, last year had some injuries and everything like that. So for him to be able to come back and be able to play a full year was huge for this team. You talk about him anchoring the defense. And so when it comes to sometimes, what's the word I'm going to use? Not necessarily your mentality, but your calling card, you may kind of fall on that a little bit too much. That's the sword you're going to kind of fall on, right? And so then if you consider yourself a defensive team, you want the scores to be low, you're not going to score that many points. Sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you need certain things to kind of happen your way. And I think that's kind of what this team kind of falls under. And so as you kind of mentioned, like the necessity to kind of get the offense going, having a young quarterback, that also, if that's a part of it too, right? The maturation of the young quarterback. So as he goes moving forward, because the defense is going to be good. The defense has been good consistently for the past couple of years. And so once you find that signal caller that can lead things offensively, that's confident in the playbook, that's confident in all the things that they have to do, then you hopefully will see that jump from this team. So we'll see what things look like for Raymond Moore next year and for Coach Wilson. Because obviously, he's going to be losing some guys on the defensive end. So they have to retool that piece as well. but you have the expectation that that's going to happen because that's what you've seen over the past couple of seasons. But what you want to see is the next step offensively.
Absolutely. So that's Morgan State. And then we switch over to Howard. Obviously, as we said in the beginning, Coach Larry Scotty resigned after his 5th season. So they had some injury issues. They started off, they had Eden James. He only played 2 games this year. So there was a lot of questions. I had a lot of people ask me, they said, well, Wayne, is he coming back? And I said, well, he does have a redshirt year, but it remains to be seen if he's going to come back to Howard. He has already gotten his degree, so we'll see what happens. Anthony Reagan, he filled in very admirably in many spots at running back. He was a bright spot for them on the second team. Noah Miles, he was as good as advertised coming in, first team as he was during the preseason. He ended up being the first teamer. The problem for Howard, and as I bring their schedule up, they went 5-7 this year. The problem for Howard was they couldn't throw the ball. And really, it was kind of hilarious that the only time that they threw the ball for real, was the last game of the season against Norfolk State. Mm-hmm. Tariq Starks, for, really all year, it was just really leading a rushing attack. The game that really turned a lot of their fortunes around for me, they had the high when they won the opener against FAMU. They kicked a field goal. Matt Conard hit a 43-yarder as time expired down there in Miami on the opening Saturday. They had a really good showing there in New York City against Morehouse, in that classic. You called the game when they thoroughly dominated Hampton, totally wiped them out. But the game that really turned it for them, that Richmond game. They had a 12-0 lead with 7 minutes remaining in the game, and they were driving in the red zone. And Tariq Starks threw interceptions on consecutive drives. And that led to Richmond coming back and winning that game. And they found themselves swimming uphill really for the rest of the season. So as they retool and get ready for the future, we don't know what the future holds for Howard. But as you know, Howard, with their standards, the next coach is definitely going to be coming in there with the expectations to win. So we'll switch back here and you can just give additional thoughts on Howard.
Yeah, I love talking with Coach Scott this year. I love covering them. I did the game versus Morehouse at MetLife when they played the House. I did the game, like you said, when they played Hampton. And the rushing attack was there. Tariq Starks was there. But as you mentioned, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? They struggled at the wide receiver position to get separation. And so when you can't separate on certain passing plays, then you become one-dimensional, and that then allows for defenses to kind of key in on how you're going to try to move the football. And so as time kind of went on and the plan kind of got out on how Howard was going to kind of attack, they struggled, as you mentioned. And so they had some tight ball games later on in the year, but it's just very tough in the MEAC with only, I think, 5 schools, right? Your margin for error is minimal. And so when your margin for error is that small, but you have some inconsistencies within your football team, then the good football teams, the other football teams within the league, are going to be able to exploit that. And you see that in your South Carolina States. You see that in your Delaware States, right, in those matchups, right? They were able to exploit those situations. And so it'll be interesting to see who the new head coach who comes in, what is the mindset and what is the mentality that he's going to try to bring in with this group? Because we know Howard, we know they're always going to be tough. We know they're always going to come with that strong mentality. And so is it going to be air raid? Is it going to be, you kind of mentioned Alvin Parker. I think that'd be a great hire because of what he's been able to do at Virginia Union. And so maybe some other potential players that come in, because if you bring in a guy like that, then they're going to be tough. They're going to run the football at a high level. I don't know if Coach Parker is going to want to leave his alma mater because he has a dynasty there. But it also kind of depends on their, his what his potential is or what he's wanting to do kind of with his career, the next step, because he's done pretty much everything he could do outside of winning a D2 national championship at Virginia Union. He's gotten multiple rounds in the D2 playoffs and things of that nature. So I want to see what the next head coach kind of brings from a mentality standpoint and how he kind of tools his roster because they have, you kind of mentioned, Anthony Regan. He was a great running back this year. Spelling, Eden James, who only played those 2 games. And so when they had a great defense, it's just like you said, when you become one-dimensional on the offensive side, that tends to be where the struggles arise. So we'll see what happens kind of moving into next year.
Yeah, so that is Howard's recap. And then we move to North Carolina Central. Now, as you can see, this page is pretty loaded. I didn't even have enough room to put all the players that had all MEAC honors, which is crazy for a team that finished in 3rd place in the league. This is how good this team was. Trey Oliver finished his 5th season. This team was loaded, man. They came in with such high expectations. Now, even though they were not picked by the media to win the MEAC in the preseason, I know I had them pretty high. A lot of us had them pretty high. Walker Harris in his redshirt senior season was the offensive player of the year. He was really, really good, very consistent. Once they got into MEAC play, had a lot of 300-yard games. Chauncey Spikes had a 200-yard game against Howard. He was a really, really good asset for them. You just look down. Thomas Johnson was a sack machine. The guy had 12 sacks on the year. Jelani Vassell, they had really, really good players all over the place. But the thing, as we look at their schedule here, going 8-4, the problems that they had, they just did not play very well situationally in the key moments, in the toughest games. The Delaware State game that they had on homecoming, that was an opportunity that they had on their home field. Where Delaware State, they came in, they knocked them, they punched them in the mouth early. They pretty much controlled things. And then once North Carolina Central started to get back in the game, it was a little bit too late. And then also the game against South Carolina State. That game was a absolute slugfest. Watch that game from start to finish on that Friday night. South Carolina State took a 17-0 lead, and then North Carolina Central comes roaring back. They have a 4-quarter lead going in, and then all of a sudden they couldn't finish. And so Trey Oliver, for all of his success and for all of the winning seasons that he's had, this is one that's going to sting with him and a lot of the fan base. But also it's something that should motivate them moving forward, because they're going to lose a lot of talent. But one thing about Trey Oliver, as much as he loses talent, the brother can recruit and he can coach his tail off and he can get guys in return. So your thoughts about North Carolina Central?
He's a coach that doesn't run from coaching. Mike Tomlin always talks about, I don't run from coaching, I run to it, right? And that's something when I talked to Coach Oliver this year before that Florida A&M game, is something that he kind of echoed, right? And so as he loses, Walker Harris, who threw for more than 3,000 yards this year, orchestrated that offense extremely well. And as he saw, he lost Jamari Taylor last year for this year because Taylor goes to Virginia and, leads them in rushing and, one of the best rushers in the entire ACC. He also knows how to develop the next generation of players. And so the expectation for them doesn't change. Like you said, it's going to sting because they had opportunities this year and they knew what it was going to take. But the toughest thing for them is what I kind of said earlier about the margin for error. I got that from Coach Oliver. That's what he told us this year. He said that, we know how small the margin of error is, and we have to execute in those moments. They didn't do that to the necessary tenor that they needed to this year, but that understanding doesn't change. And you talk about motivation for the upcoming year. Interested to see who comes back, because players are going to leave, players are going to come back. But what he brings back and how he coaches those guys now, right? How he coaches them in the spring and in the summer to get ready for the fall. I have no doubt that they'll be ready to go in 2026. Absolutely.
So, yeah, we'll see what happens here with North Carolina Central, but 8-4, and they finished 3rd in the conference. And now we go to the Delaware State Hornets, and what a season these guys had. Deshaun Jackson in his first season, had these guys flying. They led FCS in rushing for about 10 weeks. There were these guys, as you can see, with Marquise Gillis and James Jones, both of these guys. Marquise Gillis went over 1,000 yards. James Jones got close. Justice Johnson and Isaiah Cook led a really, really good offensive line. Obviously, if you're leading FCS in rushing, you have to have a good offensive line. Brian Bates was their best defender, was really, really good for these guys. I mean, they had a lot of really, really solid moments. Their season here, as you see, they were 8-4, and unfortunately for them, they kind of, I would say, they ran out of gas towards the end because, as you can see, kind of starting right about when they got into the meat of the MEAC schedule, the rushing attack started to get a little bit stifled. And you can see the physicality and the nature of the MEAC started to show its teeth. Things really started when they had that slugfest on that Thursday night against Norfolk State there in Philly, which was a great game, very well attended. Norfolk State pushed them all the way to the limit. Morgan State, we talked about it earlier, pushed them to the limit. Howard even challenged them. But that game against South Carolina State at the end, where they had a chance to win the MEAC and go to the Celebration Bowl there on their home field there in Alumni Stadium, they were undone by 4 interceptions, and a couple of missed field goals at that. They ran for over 400 yards in that game against South Carolina State. And it was definitely a moment that they had on their racket to try to get to Atlanta. But even with everything the way that it ended, these guys vastly exceeded everyone's expectations. Everyone, including me, had them finishing last in the MEAC. Everybody didn't really thinking about what was Deshaun Jackson going to be as a coach. Everybody thought that what Michael Vick was supposed to be, or, what Deshaun Jackson was, that Michael Vick was supposed to be that. But even with that said, these guys, even though they came up short in the end, these guys got a high ceiling for the future. So Delaware State.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to, Gillis and Jones, right? Gillis could have, his numbers would have been staggering if it was just him in the backfield, right? I think it helped having Jones as well in the backfield because it allowed him to stay as fresh as possible. As you said, when you're running the ball so much, you want to try to stay as fresh as possible. But those two really, you talk about exceeding expectations. Obviously, in the Delaware State building, they knew what they had. They weren't worried about the outside noise. And they played to that tune the entire year because just as you said, right, a lot of people weren't expecting very much from this team throughout the year. And that's something that you can feed on, right? That's something that, you hear that as much as coaches say, we don't really worry about the outside noise. Players, we try to stay away from what, we can control. You can't control what you hear because it's going to come in whether you want to hear it or not. And so as you hear those things, that becomes bulletin board material week in and week out. And they played to that every single week. And what it kind of just ran into is the champion, right? South Carolina State knew what it takes or knew what it took to win a championship because they had done it the year before. And they played to that standard that Coach Berry has. And so next season, what is the response, right? How do they come out next year in regards to that rushing attack? Who is going to be the bell cow? How are they going to handle those situations when it comes to maybe passing the football? Because if you have 400 yards rushing, but also 4 interceptions, that means that over a course of maybe 10 or 12 passes, you threw that 4 out of those 12 attempts were interceptions. And that's just obviously not going to get the job done. That's what we saw. And so, what in those moments are they going to do in those key moments? Because, again, you have very, very little margin for error in the MEAC.
Absolutely. So we'll see what Deshaun Jackson and his group has for an encore in year number 2. And now we get to the champions of the MEAC, South Carolina State, and they're back-to-back champions. And what a game it was down there in Atlanta to win that Celebration Bowl. So Coach Berry, which is still amazing, man, he is yet to lose a conference game as a head coach. 4 seasons, no losses in conference play, SIAC or MEAC. You see the all MEAC selections. Jarrett Washington, what a player. I'm pretty sure he's going to be drafted. This guy, defensive player of the year in the MEAC, lockdown corner. Roger Big Baby Smith, he was the only returning starter on offense, was the lineman of the year. Jordan Smith, 4 touchdowns in that game on Saturday. and you see just all of the the accolades that goes down the board. These guys going 10-3 and winning the Celebration Bowl in 4 overtimes, man. Things were a little bit uneven for them at the beginning because, they were tinkering around at quarterback, and Ryan Stubblefield started some, Billy Atkins started some. They both played in games, but you saw towards the end of the year why Ryan Stubblefield playing so much in those opening games, why it paid itself forward, because he stayed ready and he was ready. And you look, once everything started rolling, once they lost that game to Charleston Southern, because everybody was saying when they lost that game to Charleston Southern, and it was ugly, they turned the ball over 4 times. Charleston Southern was not a very good team this year. And it was like, what in the world is this? And everybody started to question if South Carolina State really was as good as projected. And then you saw they did not lose another game the rest of the way, and they win the Celebration Bowl. So your thoughts about South Carolina State, man?
Well, we first have to give it up for Chennis Berry. You mentioned it, hasn't lost a game in conference as a head coach, going back to his days at Benedict College, where he won 2 SIAC championships, then moves up to the Division I level and hasn't lost a game. And at the conference level at South Carolina State. And so, but if you've ever talked to Coach Berry, if you've ever taken a second to listen to Coach Berry, I say this all the time. I've never had a want to play football. My mom, she didn't let me play football. I love watching the quarterbacks play. My uncle was like, you should play linebacker. You're smart, right? But I was like, they do a lot. It's a lot more physical, than basketball, right? When I hear Chennis Berry talk, I want to go put on a helmet and I want to go play some football. Like, that's how motivated I get when I hear him talk, when he talks about his team, when he talks about what's necessary to win, when he talks about what you have to do to be at the top. And so just by his motivation of his team, he's shown himself as an amazing football coach. But you have to also have players, right? Coaching is important, but you have to have players that execute, that listen, and that take to that coaching. And Jordan Smith had a game for the ages in the Celebration Bowl. You talk about Ryan Stubblefield. I mean, coming off the bench and just playing lights out, that watching the game, and you think you watch the first half and you wonder, what is South Carolina State? Are they shell shocked? What are they going to do? And they just come out, and they obviously Prairie View A&M, gifts them that ball on that double reverse. But they took advantage of it and they didn't look back. And so, I mean, hats off to this team. And you also see that Coach Berry, because of his ability to motivate, because of his ability to get people to buy in and players to buy in, that it doesn't matter who's on his team. Whoever he brings in, the expectation is that they're going to play well, because you mentioned it. They only had 2 returning starters on offense and defense.
Mm-hmm.
Still were one of the top passing offense. They were the top passing offense in the league, and they played extremely well defensively. You see all the different players that, earned all conference accolades. And so that's why, regardless of how the season starts, regardless of how everything's going, if I have to put my money on somebody to get a team to get ready to go, it would be a good bet to put your money on Chennis Berry. And so now we'll have to see if they can continue it next year, right? Because now they're looking for a three-peat. They're trying to get back to the Celebration Bowl for a 3rd straight time. And with who they're going to lose, Atkins, his career ended in such tough fashion with his shoulder injury, and so you feel for him, but you're happy that Stubblefield was able to have his moment as well. Atkins got them there. Stubblefield was able to finish the job. Jordan Smith playing at just an extremely high level. So again, whoever they bring in, expect for Chennis Berry to have those boys ready to go.
Absolutely. And also, before we move forward, I just got to give a shout out to his staff. I sat down on Friday at Media Row. I sat down with their Jonathan Williams, their offensive coordinator, and also I talked to him after the game. Also, Jordan O'Daffer, their DC, they have a great staff. They have a great family atmosphere, and their motto is, we want to go 1-0 every week and dig deep. And so they've got all these acronyms, but these guys definitely did really, really well. And we'll see what happens, man. I'm not putting anything against these boys to be back in this situation again next year at all.
And you see it. You talk about Coach O'Dafford, Coach Williams, and Coach Berry, right? And how they've been together for multiple years now, and there hasn't been a lot of turnover. So the reason why you can expect the buy-in to be there, you can expect for the team to play at the level that they do, is because the same voices are there. So when you have the same voices, anybody that's returning, they are listening to the same voices. Anybody that comes in, they quickly have to get on program because everybody is doing the same thing. And I compare it to Coach Cignetti at Indiana. He talked about how he's taken a little bit less money to make sure the guys that he has come up with since his days at FCS are now with him. And that's how you can quickly change the fortunes of a program. We saw it with Indiana and how strugglesome they were prior to Coach Cignetti, and now they're in the playoff the past 2 years. And it's very similar to what Coach Chinnis Berry has done, going from the Division II level, going up a level. And so if you're South Carolina State, you probably want to sign them to an extension very soon, because there are going to be some Division I FBS schools that are going to be calling. They probably are already calling because of what they've seen him do, because it was 2 years at Benedict, then he moved up. It's been 2 years at South Carolina State. And for a coach like that has so much upside, they better lock him down, because he could potentially be on the move.
Absolutely. And then this was the final standings in the MEAC. So you saw South Carolina State, they won the MEAC and they finished 10-3. And then you can see as it went all the way down. So now we will get into the SWAC. All right. And everybody that's watching, make sure you hit the like button, like the stream, and share the stream with anybody else. Let them know, hey, the SWAC is up, man. We're talking through it. All right, so now we get into Alabama A&M, my alma mater, Alabama A&M Bulldogs. And, it was really crazy with this team. I said that they were going to finish 5-7 in the preseason. And a lot of Bulldog fans and a lot of my fellow alums are like, what the hell, Wild Wayne? And I said, well, I felt like that it would be a little bit tougher for Sam Shade to kind of get his system in place and do things, the way he needed to see fit. This team was ravaged by a lot of injuries. You called the game early in the season as I pull up, their schedule. You called that game against Alcorn State. And you saw Quad Brown, and he was doing this thing. He was slinging it around. And then Quad Brown, he ended up getting injured first against Tennessee State. And then he ended up going out for the season after the Jackson State game. So, they had injuries on their offensive line, injuries to defense. They had injuries all over the place. As you saw, the first team, I'll go back quickly, the first team all-SWAC, Trevante Abner, he's the only all-SWAC player they had on the entire roster. He actually broke his foot the week of the Jackson State game and missed 4 weeks. And that tells you how good this kid was. The fact that he still made first team all SWAC by missing 4 games, right? Now we go back to the schedule. You saw that there was a lot of really, really difficult moments. Now, this team was really lit up by a lot of explosive plays, primarily getting started in that Bethune-Cookman game. Bethune-Cookman got loose in a lot of ways, throwing the deep ball. It was just a lot. They couldn't stop the run very well. You saw that against Jackson State. Alabama State, in the Classic, that's the 4th consecutive year that they've lost in the Classic. Against Grambling was down to their 4th-string quarterback. We were playing our 4th-string quarterback. 8 sacks in that game. The Prairie View A&M game, that game very well. 48-5. It's just, there were so many different moments that happened through the season. But one thing that this team did not do was quit.
Absolutely.
And there is something that has to be said when things were going off the rails, that this team found a way to keep it together. I have no doubt that Sam Shade is going to get this thing rolling. I have no doubt that Sam Shade is going to get this team in his image and likeness. They're going to play the kind of style of defense that he wants to play. He's going to get the style of rushing attack that he wants to get, because it did not matter who was running the ball all year. They had struggles to run the ball from jump. And when you lose your starting quarterback, now Hanley was very, very good in a lot of moments, but it's just this team, they were handicapped by their defense and they were handicapped by injuries. But this is still something that I'm looking forward to in the season in the season to come. So, your thoughts on Alabama A&M, James?
Yeah, Coach Shade is great. I love talking with Coach Shade. I've talked with him since his days at Miles. He's always been very nice to me, and I think you continue to hit the nail on the head in regards to the injuries. Right, I did 3 of their games this year. The first one was Alcorn State. They looked like they were going to be a force to be reckoned with in the league. Cornelius Brown the fourth. I think he had 4 total touchdowns in that game. He hit Trey Abner for 1. He hit Jordan Chambers-Smith. And there was a lot of things to like about this team early on. Coach Schelling, the defensive coordinator, he wants to dictate what his team or what the offense does, right? He wants to take it to the offense. He's not a sit back and kind of let things kind of happen type of defensive coordinator. But what happens is when you are that type of coach and you start to run into injuries, well, some of the players that you have an expectation to be in the right place, they're just not there. And so that leaves big holes, big busts in coverage. And then you find yourself, giving up points at a high clip. And so even versus Jackson State in that game, although that game was very lopsided, 57 points put up by JSU and Mobile, you talk about not quitting, right? They didn't give up in that game either. That's the only reason why Jackson State scored so many points was because Alabama A&M continued to fight in that game. And I talked with Eric Hanley, the quarterback, and he mentioned that he stayed ready, so he didn't have to get ready. It was a quarterback competition, in the fall. Quad Brown obviously won that competition, but he firmly believes in himself at the quarterback position. And at the end of the year, when we did that TSU game, still, Coach Shade said that Quad is planning on coming back next year because he'll have the year, and it's going to be. But with Eric and the way that he played throughout the year, it's going to be a tighter competition, in the spring and then in the fall next season. They have a lot of players that you like, whether it was Frank Pierre at the wide receiver position, with maybe more consistency over the course in the winning column. He could have been a guy that could have got maybe a second team or an honorable mention nod as an all-SWAC player. Jordan Chambers-Smith, another young player that's going to be good. He played well versus Arkansas, in that opener against a high major Division I team. And so Wyatt Smith, another player that's going to be maybe coming back. And so I echo the sentiment that you have about this team. We've seen it from Coach Shade at the Division II level. He knows what it takes to kind of build a foundation and then kind of move things forward. And so this is just the growing pains of a year, right? They're not called growing pains because they feel good. They're called growing pains because they feel bad. And this was a year that was tough for Alabama A&M, but the sun will shine for the Bulldogs.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. A lot of work to do, a lot of work to build it. But you know what? That's what makes it fun, and that's what makes jobs, like these head football coaches. That's what makes their jobs that much more rewarding when they can turn situations like this around. So now we go to Alabama State, and man, this was a very, very good year for these guys. Eddie Robinson, the dean of coaches in the SWAC, completed his 4th season, which is crazy to say that he's the longest tenured coach in the SWAC, is getting ready to go into his 5th season, right? So they were 10-2. Andrew Body, Offensive Player of the Year, as everyone knows, he entered the transfer portal. Big Cam Smith and Elijah Baker on that offensive line. Jalen Jones was awesome. A lot of touchdowns, a lot of yards. He had over 1,000 yards receiving. Tashawn Sims, really, really good at safety. These guys, they had players, man. They were doing things on the offensive side of the board. And here's their season schedule. Sorry, it was 10-2. Sorry, everybody, I didn't update it. They won the Turkey Day Classic 58-21. They were 10-2. So you called the FAMU game.
Yes.
You had a really good seat to see those boys go crazy in that game. So talk about Alabama State.
It just came down to the fact that they lost to Jackson State, right? They were one of the best teams in the conference. It was obvious with the way that they finished off the year. They beat Prairie View A&M, who ended up winning the conference. And representing the SWAC in the Celebration Bowl. So they have something to say about that and who was the best team in the SWAC this year. And Jaleel Lenore is somebody that I've known since he was, a sophomore at Central State. He comes in and he's a spark plug defensively for Alabama State. Jalen Jones was an FCS second team All-American. So not just second team in the SWAC, but an All-American over all FCS this year. You talk about Andrew Body as Offensive Player of the Year in the conference, and he just had a wonderful year. You love it for him after having the shoulder injury 2 years in a row, just to show and be able to play. Obviously he had an injury that kind of took him out for the last portion of this season again. But what he was able to do while he was on the field was extravagant, and so you're happy for him. Coach Robinson is a guy that's always rooting for him because he knows what he kind of went through going from Montgomery to Birmingham consistently for that rehab on that shoulder. And so there was just so many great things for this team this year. And it's just because of how the divisions work that they didn't get a chance to play another game. And that's what TC Taylor talked about when we get to Jackson State. But Coach Taylor told us this year, right, we want to hold our own destiny. And so by winning that game versus Alabama State, they held their own destiny. They controlled their own destiny down the stretch. So even though they lost to Grambling in Las Vegas, they still controlled their own destiny, and they were able to play for that SWAC championship. And although they lost, Alabama State would have loved to have been the team to at least give themselves a chance to play that championship game.
Yeah, and that was the game of the year, really, for most people, was that game that they played October 11th down there in Jackson. That game went all the way down to the very last play on the 2-yard line. And, the play that was made by Ashton Taylor to stop that play and keep Alabama State out of the end zone. Alabama State, man, this is for all the success that they had this year going 10-2. It's the question will always be what could have been. And one thing about Eddie Robinson, he knows how to build his team, man. He knows how to find a way. When they've had injuries at quarterback, last year it was Kareem Key who came in and took him to, gave him success. This year, Tashawn Smoot came off the bench and did some things, led them to some victories. Their running game was really, really good with Kuykendall and Ligon and also Jamari Holtzclaw. They had really good guys, man. But we'll see what happens for an encore in year number 5 for Eddie Robinson. And now we move on.
Oh, the finishing I'll say.
I'll go back. Go ahead.
They bring guys back. So that's another thing, right? That wide receiving core was young. And so they're going to bring those guys back at the skill position. They bring back the running back. They bring back, Smoot at quarterback. And so as long as they can keep things going on the offensive line, the offense should look similar to last year, right? And so now defensively, as long as they can keep, and Coach Robinson is a defensive guy. So the defense is going to be good next year. And they're going to have that Jackson State game circled next year for sure. Because that's going to be the difference maker in the conference. That it's been that way for the past couple of years, right? Obviously, the East has run through Jackson, and so that's a game that they got things going versus FAMU, and so we'll see. I want to see what they do on defense because it was a great season for them, as you said, and so it's just unfortunate for them, right, that they weren't able to maybe play that final game, that championship game.
Absolutely. And so now we move on to Alcorn State. And this team, this was a tale of 2 seasons. These guys, they finished 5-7. Cedric Thomas, he completed his 2nd season. You saw the all-SWAC selections to Marion Edwards, their stud linebacker. He led the conference in total tackles. He was a tackling machine. Reggie Davis came on strong late. Transfer from Chattanooga at running back. And he came on strong, had a couple 100-yard games down the stretch. Really, really good player for them. You saw Cameron Rogers and Eric Thomas. Now, the thing about this team, man, these guys, they got off to such a horrible start. You saw they started off 0-5. They lost a couple of tough ones. You saw the very first one out the gate, losing to Northwestern State in a game that I mean, it was just flat out pitiful. They said it themselves. They turned the ball over left and right. They snapped a punt over the punter's head. You know, Northwestern State had won their first game in over 1,000 days in that opener. And then you saw it just kind of started to spiral. The game against Pine Bluff, you know, the Southern Heritage Classic, you know, that was a game that they had a chance to win that game late. The Prairie View game, they missed a field goal late, you know, towards the end of that game where they had a chance to win that game at home. Then they get their first win against, you know, Lincoln. And then they played Florida A&M for their homecoming, another game that went back and forth. But then you started to see things start to turn. I thought what really got these boys in order was when they went down to Texas Southern and they thoroughly spanked those guys. I mean, it was thorough domination. And, you know, they only had four penalties in that game, and they had no turnovers. And then the Southern game, and then Grambling, they played so well against Grambling. And that game down the stretch there against Jackson State, that was a very thrilling game. They gave Jackson State all they can handle there in the vet. You know, this team right here, Jalen Tolbert, was really good for them. He got comfortable down the stretch. Their running game was solid for most of the year. The problem that they had was just situational football in a lot of these moments. They had problems with penalties in inopportune times, and they had key turnovers. But 5-7 and getting it to 4-4 the way it finished, it gives you some really good optimism if you're an Alcorn State Brave fan for next year, because another thing that was very key for Alcorn State was Cedric Thomas. He changed the play caller middle of the season. And when he changed play callers, then their offense started to do things. So your thoughts about Alcorn?
You talk about the change in play calling. It was just a change in philosophy because they knew they had Ja'Cory Sewell. They knew they had Reggie Davis. So they knew they wanted to run the football and kind of utilize that 1-2 punch. But the problem was everybody else knew that too. And so they were stacking the box on early downs. They were struggling to get positive yards on early downs. And with Jalen Tolbert being in his first year in the offense, he was forced to do a lot in deeper down and distances early on. And that's what turns into your holding penalties. That's what turns into your interceptions or struggles and things of that nature. But halfway through the year, when they started to throw the ball on early downs to open up the box and to really kind of soften the box, then that's what allowed for Reggie Davis to get going late and really showcase his ability. And that's what kind of shifted the paradigm for them throughout the year. And you mentioned them giving Jackson State all they could handle. I mean, you know, the Tigers fans were you know, biting their nails, wondering were they going to finish that one off and play in the SWAC championship game. And Alabama State was hoping that, you know, Alcorn State was going to be able to finish the job. And so I really like what Cedric Thomas was able to do at the end of the year. And he shared an anecdote with us about a puzzle and how he was with his uncle. His uncle was like, hey, you know, come do this puzzle with me. And these are two grown men, right? And he's trying to finish this puzzle, trying to get it to work and everything like that. And he was really struggling with this puzzle. And he was getting frustrated. And he's like, why am I getting this is, you know, it should be a kid's thing to do. But once he started figuring out the puzzle, the uncle was like, see, now you're understanding, you know, why this was so important. And the reason it was so important is because you start with the framework, obviously, as you do your puzzle, then you start to fit the pieces together. And as you start to fit the piece together, the picture starts to become very visible. And then as you put the final pieces in, that's when you're excited about what happened. And he then took that mentality to his team and he forced them, every position group, to do a specific puzzle. And he said that moment in the middle of the year is what shifted everything for them, because they started to understand, okay, we have to get the framework together. Then we have to start getting ourselves together in this fashion. He said it helped not only him, it helped his team. He said he helped his marriage. And so all of those things are what kind of really shifted everything this year for Alcorn State. So, and that's why every single big play they had a puzzle. They don't have a turnover chain. They don't have a turnover belt. They have a framed puzzle that they pick up anytime they do a big play. So I think they figured it out. So with Jalen Tolbert potentially coming back, with their foundation being there and that framework already put together, hopefully it's a beautiful picture for them in 2026.
Yeah, and you called that game down there in Houston, so you know That was a really, really good game. I mean, very good change from when you first saw them against Alabama A&M to when you saw them against Texas Southern. So that's Alcorn State. And now we go to Bethune-Cookman, man. And Bethune-Cookman, this was a really good season for these guys. Again, Coach Raymond Woody, there was not a lot that was expected from these guys. They were picked to be finishing, down there fifth in the division. But these guys, their offense really, really was explosive a lot of the season. You see they're all SWAC selections. You see, Antoine Watts was their first teamer. You saw Javon Ross, he returned a couple kickoffs for touchdowns. Malik Huggins, he got loose in many moments. Their offense was pretty good. They had Kamani Robinson, Ali Scott. They had really good guys running the ball. They had good offensive line play. The problems that they tended to have when they ran into a few issues was, defensively. Because for a while, a lot of the times when they would score a lot of points, they'd give up points where they get a lot of yards. They give up a lot of yards in return. What really impressed me first was the fact that they were down 41-13 entering the fourth quarter against South Carolina State in their third game. And these guys fought back and they made that a game. And then they carried it over into the next week in a game that was on HBCUGo against Edward Waters. And you saw a little bit about what was to come. And I remembered, I said, A&M was playing them the next week. And I told our people, guys, these guys, they're explosive on offense. And then some of our people were like, I don't know, man. It was just Edward Waters, and look at who they lost. I said, I'm telling you. And then you just started to see it. I think the game that really impressed me the most from them was the game that they played against Southern. They totally blitzed those guys, ran them off the field in the rain. And then the game against Jackson State, that was a game that was nipped and tucked. Real strong battle, went into the fourth quarter. And they capped it off by getting a win in the Florida Classic, the first time in 5 tries against FAMU, when Tim McClain, coming off the bench, throws a touchdown, a 50-yarder in the final closing minutes on 4th down to win that game. So talk about Bethune-Cookman, man, going 6-6 and 5-3 in SWAC play.
We talk about hot seats. Right. And that's not something, to say lightly. Right. If we're being completely honest and being forthcoming. But coming into the year, after some of the struggles that Bethune-Cookman had in the past 2 seasons, Raymond Woody had to show some growth with this team this year. I'm a firm believer of giving a coach 4 years because you got to get your guys in, you got to set your foundation. But some administrations don't believe in that. They want to see something in 2 years. They want to see something in 1 year, right? And so I felt like he was going to be able to get things figured out. But I do know that, the tinkering start, year 3. And so for them to have a game versus Jackson State that if they won, they would have potentially set themselves up to almost control their own destiny to be the SWAC East champion. That is a big jump from what we had seen in years prior, because I did the game last year when they lost to Clark Atlanta, right? And they lost to And so it's a big shift from what they were last year to where they were this year. And so that's something to be excited about. You talk about Malik Huggins and his big playability. Cameron Ransom throughout this year, again, showing that he can be the starting quarterback for this team, because with Bethune-Cookman, switching quarterbacks here and there and kind of seeing who they wanted in. But again, Cameron Ransom, reminds me not of, Cam Newton in the sense of that he's going to play at the next level and be an MVP, but just with the way that he plays, his strength, his build, his ability to throw the football, his ability to run the football. And so when you have a guy who, is a matchup problem at the quarterback position, because if you put him in the run game, he can literally run you over. He can run your linebackers over. He literally makes mincemeat of cornerbacks, and he has a little speed on him. And then you have big playability around him with Malik Huggins and Javon Ross. You really like what they can be moving forward.
Yeah. And man, this was a really, really good team that they had this year in terms of just their improvement. And you can see Coach Raymond Woody, he was really, really excited at the end of the season. We talked to him on the last SWAC call on the Monday, and he said, we're really, really happy by how the guys came together. And so, we'll see what he does in the fourth season. Obviously, he's got to retool some things because he's losing some guys like Cam Ransom, Tim McClain, both of them, they're seniors. Malik Huggins is a senior. So, they've got to kind of build some things. But, there's a lot to like about what Bethune-Cookman did. So we'll move forward now into FAMU. And we talked a little bit earlier about FAMU. James Colsey was fired after his second season. And you saw that for a team that has high expectations every single year, like they do, you look at their all SWAC selections, this is a little bit low. There's a lot low compared to what Florida A&M usually has this time of year. Ashton Grable, he was a first teamer last year. He was a second teamer this year. You saw Riles Jr. was second teamer, and then Daniel Porto was the first team kicker. Really, about this team right here, they went 5-7, and being 5-7 and 4-4. I didn't put that last game up there yet, but we know what happened against Mississippi Valley State. They lost that game. This was about the fact that they had struggles on offense in terms of they had no identity on offense. For a good chunk of the year, they couldn't run the ball. And then all of a sudden, we start seeing Jamal Haley. You called that game against Pine Bluff. And you're thinking like, first off, in the Southern game, that's when you found out who Jamal Haley was. He ran for 157 yards against them. And then Thad Franklin had been struggling pretty much all year. And then against Pine Bluff, then he gets loose to rush for over 100 yards. And then you started to see some of the things that could possibly been possible for these guys. But then you look at the way that they had quarterback struggles. R.J. Johnson, struggled at quarterback, struggled to turn the ball loose at times, was unsure of himself in the pocket, wanted to run, should have stayed. Also they had problems when, that game against North Carolina Central. They put Jet Petty in there. And then once they put Jet Petty in there, because everybody had been saying, well, we need Jet Petty to be in there. They put him in there, and then you said, oh, no wonder why Jet Petty hadn't been in there, because you saw he threw 3 interceptions. And then some of the interceptions he threw, it because you were there. There were some interceptions were like, this kid probably doesn't know how to read some coverage, right? But at the end of the day, this was just about not being able to get anything done. I mean, they had bad, ugly losses as you look through here. Obviously, the Valley loss was a nasty one, but losing the way that they did to Bethune-Cookman in the end, that was nasty. And then just the fact that they lost to Alabama State, North Carolina Central, and Jackson State, all of them in Bragg by wide margins. That is always going to be unacceptable to the faithful down there in Tallahassee. So your thoughts about Florida A&M, a little bit of their season, and then, we talked about with Quinn Gray coming in, but let's talk about just, their season as a whole.
They just underachieved, and that's something that's unacceptable for a heralded program like Florida A&M. When you have talent throughout the roster, when you bring guys in that are talented in other places and they don't mesh, or you can't get them to mesh, then you have lopsided contests. And like I said, Coach Colsey is a great coach. Coach Henry Burris, the offensive coordinator, great coach. And Coach Thompson, those are great coaches. But their team this year didn't execute in certain situations, and they were just strapped by the quarterback position early on. You saw it even in the first game, right? Because when if you go back 2 seasons to Daniel Richardson, that guy had played lots of football games. Mm-hmm. He had thrown for over 10,000 yards, right? Or thrown for over 9,000 yards before he stepped on campus at Florida A&M. And so when he comes in at the quarterback position, he's steady. He's not going to make mistakes. He knows what he's going to have to do. And so you can kind of, let things loose early on, right? RJ Johnson comes in. He hasn't taken a snap in 3 seasons, I believe, or 2 seasons.
2 seasons.
In 2 seasons after playing at Toledo. And so he hasn't been on the field in meaningful competition in 2 seasons. And so you are trying to kind of move him along steadily. But again, that impacts your ability in play calling. It impacts your ability in situational play calling when you know you need something, but you can't get it because you don't feel comfortable with his ability to execute. And then the rumbling came about Jet Petty and him potentially playing this year. Well, it's everybody wants to go to the backup quarterback until you realize that there is nothing after the backup quarterback. And
right.
So when I would talk with, our staff and the other broadcasters with us, right? Obviously, for RJ Johnson, it was a struggle. And so Jet Petty in practice, he had shown potentially that he should get a chance, right? But once you make that move, there's no going back, because now if he doesn't pan out, now you go back to the starter. He's lost a little confidence. Now Jet Petty doesn't know, oh, you gave me a chance and now I'm gone. So he's losing confidence. And that's when things kind of tumble a little bit. I think that, RJ Johnson getting a chance to sit and kind of watch that in North Carolina Central game, better understand how he needed to kind of go about his business. Because that's what the coaching staff said. They said that by him being benched, he then realized, oh, I'm not doing the right things in my preparation to get ready for games. And so it worked out, and you saw the wins that came after that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, once they lost to Jackson State, and we talk about the difference between Alabama A&M and their struggles and this team and their struggles, right? Alabama A&M down the stretch, you could tell that they were still playing for something, whatever it was, whatever the coach staff was requiring them to play for. But for Florida A&M, those losses in the Classic, in a big game, and the Valley, can you say the same about them? So there's still going to be talent. They're going to be able to get talent to Tallahassee. But another thing, you have one of the longest win streaks in FCS going back to last year. And then this year, how many losses do you have at home? Bad losses at that. So all of that put together, you throw all those recipes in. I mean, you throw all those ingredients in there. That's not a recipe for success. And that's why Coach Colsey was shown the boot. And so now they got to retool, because it's a lot of heritage at Florida A&M.
Absolutely. So, new regime getting ready to get started next year. And obviously we'll be talking about that plenty in the off season. So now we go to Grambling, and Grambling, Coach Mickey Joseph finished his second season. And, there's been a lot of talk about his future because, he had a 2-year contract, and his contract is coming up. So we'll see about what Mickey Joseph, but we're talking about what they did for this season. And this season they went 7-5. You saw they're all SWAC selections, man. These are 3 of the best defensive players you can have in HBCU football. Warren Robinson and Bryce Cage were definitely in a lot of backfields, and Markel Linzer was a really good defensive back. Thing we know about these guys, obviously, and they were 7-5. They finished 4-4 in the SWAC. They lost that game at the end against Southern. You saw the way it was. Now they got a gift when they played Kentucky State with the officiating. And then they went to Prairie. They played Prairie View down in Dallas, and that down there in the Cotton Bowl, the State Fair Classic. And Prairie View's defense got after them. And then there was a game against Texas Southern when they had the ball right inside the 5-yard line, and they fumbled it late. Right? They let that game get away. Pine Bluff, they outlasted a long rain delay to win that game. And then the game down there in Vegas that you were part of, man. Ended up being a real classic game, but it had a lot of injuries that went to 2 quarterbacks in that game. And ultimately, you never got to see Zay T-Set play again. And then, Ashton Fry, he was the quarterback against Texas Southern, their backup. He got injured for the year. Then against Alabama A&M, they went with Eamon Derensburg. He got injured for the year. So they ended up playing the A&M game, the Bethune-Cookman, the Alcorn State, and the Southern game with Hayden Benoit, who did pretty good down the stretch, 4-string quarterback. but finishing 7-5, and they lost the Bayou Classic, and that was a game that they really had a chance to win. They controlled a lot of that game, and they allowed Southern to come back in that second half. Finishing with 2 consecutive losses was definitely something that really soured what was a kind of a get back year for them. They beat Jackson State for the second year in a row, but once again, when you're Grambling, you have those expectations to be SWAC West competitors, and they ended up not being in the money in the end. But nevertheless, your thoughts about Grambling?
And that's the thing, like they were, kind of getting to that point. And it was so unfortunate. You still feel for Zay T-Set. Continue to pray for him and his recovery, and kind of what happened to him in that Las Vegas Classic. Because, again, I covered him when he was at Southern the year before. It was a big deal for him to be able to play in his home state. Obviously, he's from the Baton Rouge area, went to Scotlandville High School. And so you just really feel for a guy that knows the history of these schools and playing in these type of games. And so under Coach Joseph, the team is always inspired. He jokes that, Grambling is everybody's Super Bowl. So regardless of what their record is, teams are going to play their best against Grambling. And so he needs his team to play at a high level consistently. And because of the history of Grambling, the expectation is very, very high. And so it's still difficult, though, to expect something from a third string or a fourth string QB. It's difficult to expect something from guys that, not only they will play, there's a reason they're on the roster. There's no disrespect to those players, but it's just the truth of the matter, right? If you're trotting out somebody that maybe is a third string or fourth string, it's going to be more difficult than if you're trotting out your main guy that's taking all the first team snaps consistently from the beginning of the year. So they did the best they could with what they had. They would have loved to get a win in that, in that Bayou Classic late in the year. But now, like you said, with a lot of uncertainty, you have to think that this team is going to find something going into next year because it is Grambling. It is a historic program, and that's really the way I want to kind of finish things. Is that you believe in a program that has so much history.
Yeah, and for Grambling, I really hope that Mickey Joseph comes back. He's one of my favorite guys in the SWAC. I enjoy sitting down with him. First time I ever talked to him in person at SWAC Media Day. I also enjoyed interviewing him every single week. I just hope he comes back. And if he does, I know that he's going to have a lot of fire to really get this program to try to push him, to challenge up there with Prairie View in that West. So 7-5 for Grambling this year. All right, now we'll talk about shout out the Valley. That's what I always say. Shout out the Valley, Mississippi Valley State Delta Devils. And, these guys, they got to win down the stretch. And they won the game that they needed to win for the second year in a row against FAMU. Coach Terrell Buckley, completed his first season. He had one all-SWAC selection. Their kicker, Marco Javicic, he second team. These guys, as you look through, they were they finished 2-10 on the season. Winning that game at the end. They had a really tough run, man. That first game with Josh Brown really, did some things against Southern, pushed those guys. The Texas Southern game was a game that they really had, man. That was the game where, they were struggling to snap the ball to the punter really all season. And they decided to fake a punt in their own territory and didn't get it. And then Texas Southern ended up taking it down and getting a touchdown to win that game. These guys battled, man. They fought. But, the thing about Mississippi Valley State, and this is just one of the situations that they have, is that they have issues with, obviously funding and also being able to get strength and conditioning, because it's something that Coach Buckley said. He said, we've really, really fought hard to get strength and conditioning to be a thing for us. Nutrition, and these guys, they would get worn down a lot in second halves of games. And it was just unfortunate for them that, that they had some of the outcomes that they did, but to finish it the way they did against FAMU, it was awesome. And I got to say, Coach Buckley in his first year, he's going to do some things with those guys. And I say it every year in my last comment about them. I say it every year. I said, these guys are going to get somebody. I said, I don't know who it is, but it turned out that they got FAMU again and ultimately sent Coach Colsey on.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you. Talk about Valley, man.
Got you. It was kind of got kind of messed up. So it's just hard to win there. It's just the long and the short of it. There's not very much in Itta Bena, period, other than the school. It's hard to keep players there, right? You have Nate Rembert, who is all SWAC 2 years ago, and he doesn't stay. He moves on. Former head coach, and moves on to be at Memphis. And so Kendrick Wade. So it's just a hard place to build, because it's a hard place to, once you start to lay a foundation, players are on the move, sometimes coaches are on the move, and that's just the way things are. And so for them to get the win that they did versus Florida A&M, for them to be competitive versus certain schools, is what kind of they're looking for. And now the next step is, to stack some wins, to be competitive in more games. And honestly, for them going into next year, that would be a win. If they are more competitive in games throughout the year, and they find maybe 2 or 3 wins, and players understand, like, hey, we can do something here. We can kind of build something here. You just have to get some type of buzz, because it's very difficult in Itta Bena.
Yeah. So shout out to Valley. I'll look forward to seeing what Coach Buckley has for a second season, but it can only get better, man. All right, UAPB, Alonzo Hampton completed his 3rd season. And, it's one of the things that people have been wondering, because he had a 3-year contract. It hasn't been any word about if he's being renewed or if he's being brought back. Right now, he's still the head coach of UAPB until said otherwise. Jalen Jennings was pretty good for those guys running the ball. He was a guy you can hang your hat on. He had a 200-yard game. Denarius Hilliard, he was a really, really good linebacker. So you had 2 first-teamers for this team that ended up going 4-8. Now, Christian Peters was their quarterback. He transferred from Shaw. He had a couple good games. You saw him at the Southern Heritage. You also saw him against FAMU up close. So talk about UAPB and what you think about them, this year and what they need to do to get better, man.
And Coach Hampton is another one of those coaches, very similar to what I said about Coach Berry, that loves his players. You can feel it when you're on a coach's call with him. You can feel it when you're at walkthrough with him. And so that's a guy that you root for, because you know how much it means to him in regards to coaching, in regards to bringing guys in, helping them get better at their position, helping them get better in the classroom, helping them get better as young men. And so I think just for them, it's kind of similar to Valley in the fact that it's hard to keep players there, right? Because their wide receiver 2 years ago, Gibson, who led the SWAC in receiving, he's at Oklahoma. There's talent in this league, and there's talent in some of these small places or in these smaller schools. And so the only issue that these coaches run into is that they bring a guy in, they share with him what it's going to take to be good. They then do that, and then somebody else is coming to get them from a Power 5. And these are like not just, any power. These are major Power 5 schools that are coming in and grabbing these players. And so when you ask, what is it this team like UAPB has to do to kind of be successful, is they have to retain players the best that they can, because it's difficult to retain players when you don't have the same NIL money as a Power 5 school. So because also these coaches are good people in the sense that they want to have conversations with the players about what they're planning on doing. Like we're going back to Mickey Joseph with Grambling. He said, I talk to my players about their NIL opportunities elsewhere because I want them, if they're going to leave me, I want them to go somewhere and start. I don't want them to go be a third or fourth string. So I'll talk to them about it. They don't need agents in my program. It's an open door policy. And Coach Hampton is the same way. He knows what's potentially out there for some of these players, which makes it difficult for him as the head coach, but he's honest with his players. And so I think what they need to do is just continue to have that open door policy, continue to be open about what the expectations are. They know what potentially can happen when it comes to players coming and going. And honestly, Coach Hampton loves the grind. So it doesn't matter if players are coming. It doesn't matter if players are going. He's going to recruit guys. He's going to develop guys. And he just wants them to be successful. So whether that's them being successful there for a year and then going on and playing in the league, or that's being with him for 3 or 4 years and being able to win championships at UAPB, he's all about the student athlete. And I think that is very admirable. And it's going to show, time is going to tell whether it's him keeping his position there, going somewhere else and being, a chance to develop young men and really just kind of grow a program. So I just think that he's going to continue to chug away and plug away and kind of let the chips fall as they may.
Absolutely. So that's UAPB, and we'll see what happens with them moving forward. And now we go to Southern. And this was I gotta say, we didn't have this one on our bingo cards. These guys were picked by the media and including me to finish first in the West this year. Coach Terrence Graves, he was fired after a 1-6 start. We know about Marshall Falk, the new heir is coming in. They had one all-SWAC selection, and a pretty good one at that. Kelby Givens was the first team all-SWAC. He had a really good year. But obviously, when you go, and he went 2-10, and they won that one game at the end there against Grambling in the Bayou Classic. When you go 2-10, you don't really know a lot about what Kelby Givens did. And you look all the way through, man. It was a lot of head scratchers. It was a lot of head scratchers. You were there front and center when you saw him play Prairie View. And I remember the quote that Tremaine Jackson had. Yeah, happy homecoming.
he was hype. He was definitely hype at the end of that game. The rain at the end, it was kind of like poetic how that game ended with the rain kind of raining on the homecoming parade. That's the cliche. And it was a difficult year for Southern, to say the least. They had high expectations coming off a SWAC championship game berth last year. But as I mentioned, when you aren't settled at the QB position, you're going to struggle. And Ashton Strother did his best. Cam McCoy did his best. But they lose their returning starter in the Mississippi Valley State game, who they thought was going to play the entire year. Ashton Strother gets there, I think, a week or two before the season starts. Cam McCoy gets there in the summer as a transfer from Jackson State.
Right.
And they could never execute consistently on offense. And so they had good wide receivers, and they had Trey Holly at running back, who is an excellent running back.
Yes.
And so, but when you don't have somebody to orchestrate the offense in a manner that can kind of keep going, then you're going to be giving the ball up. You're going to be turning the ball over, and your defense is going to be in tough positions consistently. So that was just kind of the undoing for Southern this year. They have to get the quarterback position correct next year. Marshall Falk knows plenty about that. He had a great quarterback, and Kurt Warner while he was at, or when he was with the Rams. And so, Kurt Warner's going to be a Hall of Famer. So it's just the quarterback position is going to be key for them. They got to get that right. Marshall Falk, I'm excited to see what Trey Holly looks like next year with Marshall Falk as his coach. As long as
if he can keep him.
I'm excited to see what he looks like next year, as long as Holly stays, and they're going to go as he goes next year, to be completely honest.
Yeah. And, so for Southern Jag fans, this is one to flush. We'll move on. All right, Texas Southern. Now, Chris Dishman completed his second season, and This was the first winning season that they had in 25 seasons. Now, obviously, they had the SWAC championship winning season of 2011, but that was taken away, obviously, because of ineligible players. So, but officially on the records, they went 6-5, and this was a winning season for them. They had one all SWAC selection defensive lineman, Michael Akins. Now, their season started real crazy with that game that ended there against Prairie View, where they gave up a touchdown on the very, very last play of the game. Now, these guys, they snuck through against Valley. They snuck through against Grambling. And when they had that 4-game winning streak to get to 4-3, everybody was saying, okay, well, hey, they got a chance there in the West. And then that game, you were down there for that game against Alcorn State. That ultimately was the demise. And they were never the same after that. They did win the game against Southern. They beat Alabama A&M. But really, the Alcorn State game headed into that Alabama State one, those were the ones that really just derailed, what they had going. This is a season where even though they were 6-5, there were questions about how much better could it have been. Athian Renfro, he was a pretty good running back for them. Rorion Richardson was a breakthrough at receiver. KJ Cooper, he played most of the year. He didn't play the last game against Alabama A&M. That was Jordan Davis. But defensively, they made plays. But again, it was situational football. It really, really hurt these guys in the games that they lost. So, you covered these guys and you called one of their games. So, talk about what you thought about Texas Southern.
One, congratulations to Coach Chris Dishman. He's a very soft-spoken guy when it comes to the media, but he's a very fiery head coach. And so it meant a lot for him. And it meant a lot for his coaching staff to help get him and this entire team, this entire program, that 6th win to make sure they were over 500 for the first time in 25 seasons. I love KJ Cooper at the quarterback position. I think he can make all the throws. I think he's an underrated quarterback, especially going back to that game versus Alcorn State, where there were a lot of drops in that game. If there are some catches, that game is much different. Do I think a little bit that the team was looking past Alcorn because of how they had played and how they had kind of done throughout the year? Maybe a little bit. But I also, again, I think that KJ Cooper played, it's not going to go down based on his numbers because of kind of how lopsided it was in regards to his completion percentage. But there were a lot of drops in that game. And so there was a drop for an interception late in the first half. And so watch out for KJ Cooper at quarterback next year for Texas Southern. That's the first thing I'll say. I'll go on the record in saying that. Secondly, for this team, they were tight ball games, but they won those ball games. Like you said, it doesn't matter if it's 1 point or 50 points, a win's a win. And so they were able to kind of get the job done. And they were in position to play for the West. They lost to Alcorn State. That was the important game, as you kind of mentioned. And I think if they finish that game, that Alabama State game is a little different because Alabama State, obviously, they knew they had to win out to have a chance. Be a little different. But again, understanding that there was really nothing to play for late in the year other than that 6-5 record, they really put it on Alabama A&M late. Jordan Davis played fantastic in limited duty. All Davis was able to do, he practiced, I think, 2 days. He ran the walkthrough the day before and then came out and had an exceptional game. And so that just shows that there was really a next man up mentality for Texas Southern. And next year, they will be a team that others in the West will have to worry about because, with the returners, with the eligibility that guys are going to have coming back, Athian Renfro, as well as, like I said, with KJ Cooper. And we'll wait and see as guys, continue to, make sure they're going to be back next year. But if those guys are coming back, they will be a team that will challenge for the West.
Absolutely. I agree totally. And Chris Dishman, really good job. And we'll see what he does, man. He's improved them. 5 wins in the first year, 6 wins this year. So we'll see what happens moving into the next. All right. Now we talk about Jackson State. And we talk about the East champions. They won their 4th SWAC East title in the last 5 seasons. This was this was a different, very, very different team this year from the last. Coach T.C. Taylor completed his third season. You look at, how decorated their team was. The DeAndre Towns Blue, first teamer. They had the defensive player of the year in Quincy Ivory. Quincy Ivory was just a stud, right? Beast. Reed Pulliam, another returning guy, man. He was a strong linebacker. Jacobian Morgan, when he was in there, man, when he was healthy, he got off to such an amazing start, right? And that says a lot about his ability, the fact that he was second team all SWAC, by the fact that he missed 4 games, right? Quay Davis, Jeremiah Williams, and then the aforementioned Nathan Rembert. He was really, really good in his transfer season coming over. And then Cam Salas. Cam Salas, he entered the transfer portal. DeAndre Towns Blue, he's done with eligibility. Jeremiah Williams is out of eligibility. Unfortunately, Jacobian is out of eligibility. But this is going to have a different makeup of a team, regardless of how people going into the portal, regardless of what it was. This was going to be a different team next year anyway. And like Iz said, he said our team was without Jacobian was different from our season with Jacobian. And I got to give a shout out to Jared Lockhart, because Jared Lockhart, he came in, in that Grambling game, and he ended up actually carrying these guys, down the stretch. Now they were 9-3. They unfortunately they lost the SWAC title game at home to Prairie View. But you look at just where he was. He came in, he started the FAMU game. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot. They ran well with the running game. Then, the running game, and he made a few key throws against Valley. Where he was really, really asked to step his game up was those last 2 leading into the Prairie View game. The Bethune-Cookman game, needed to make some plays, made a couple plays. He threw a long touchdown to Jameel Gardner against Bethune-Cookman. That was key. He had to make some plays with his legs against Alcorn State down the stretch. So, again, this is when you're Jackson State, you have high expectations, right? This is a very, very passionate fan base, right? Everybody watches my show that are from Jackson State. I get all of the comments. They're very, very passionate. You know it because you were down there for Hampton. You know it. You know the atmosphere. You know the whole makeup. So talk about Jackson State this year, man.
For JSU, they have so much talent. So much talent. TC Taylor talks about how, yes, guys left, but we're going to bring guys in. We're never losing more than we're bringing in. We're always reloading, and we're getting depth at certain positions. And so you mentioned some guys that are in the transfer portal already, like Ahmad Miller. And when you have, your leading rusher, 1,000-yard rusher, he's gone. You have an expectation that they're going to bring somebody in. Jared Lockhart, when I asked Coach about Lockhart after the Tuskegee game, because we did the Alabama A&M game on HBCUGo, I said, what are your thoughts on Lockhart? He said that the future is bright at Jackson State with Jared Lockhart. And so when we then got a chance to see him versus Grambling when Jacobian goes out, he made plays in that game. Stofa did well up to a point, but then the offense kind of stifled, so they had to go to Lockhart. And he had the big throw to Nate Rembert. He had the drive to take the lead. And so he's a gamer. He's an absolute gamer. And, even getting down the stretch, you mentioned some of the plays he had to make versus Bethune and Alcorn. Just in that Prairie View game in that fourth quarter, they didn't give him the ball. So right. Prairie View A&M, I think that final fourth quarter, they had the ball for like 10 minutes. They didn't score, but they had the ball for like 10 minutes, and they had him back because they found the ball on the 1. So Lockhart is with a shot of his own end zone, and they couldn't get that first down. And so this Jackson State team next year, you got your quarterback. Mm-hmm. And what have I been saying this entire stream? If you got a quarterback, you got something.
Yes, sir.
So it starts there. If you got your quarterback, you got something, and you just work from there. You bring back Travis Terrell. You bring back Nate Rembert. And, Jalen Dupree, also a guy that's gone in the transfer portal, but you're going to keep another wide receiver. And so when you have skill guys, if you can just block those guys up, because the defense is going to be there. The nucleus from this year is going to be there next year in regards to your quarterback, your top wide receiver, a running back that's explosive, your kick returner, and then you're bringing back some guys defensively. So it's just, again, you feel for Jacobian, the senior, does all that work to get back with that foot injury. And again, we got Jonas Fortillion. Jonas Fortillion didn't play at all this year.
Didn't even play at all this year, right?
So the top wide receiver from last year didn't even play. So thank you, JSU Tigers 8954. Jonas Fortillion, their top wide receiver, didn't even play this year. So he has his year of eligibility back. So now you got guys. They're going to have guys. And with the coaching staff that they're going to get those guys ready. And so watch out, SWAC East, because Jackson State isn't going anywhere. They're looking for another title.
Right. And, they're going to retool. I mean, again, I know a lot of people have been talking about, oh, look at how many people enter in the portal. Listen, I say it all the time. It is a year-to-year principle. Every player is on a one-year deal, right? Every team is going to be different from one year to the next. And if there's any staff that I know I have confidence in that can retool the hell out of a roster, it's TC Taylor and his group. They can retool. Now they're going to have to retool that offensive line because they're losing a couple of key pieces there. They're also going to have to retool on the defense, right? Especially up front in that front seven. They're going to have to really retool there because they had guys that were leaving due to graduation. But they're going to get it together. And like you said, man, I expect them to be in the money again next year. And like Brandy said, the portal gives and takes. It works both ways. Yes, indeed. That is definitely yeah. So that is what you got for Jackson State, and then we'll talk about the SWAC champions, Prairie View. And everybody, make sure you like the stream. Everybody, we're getting down the stretch of our show here, so we're going to Prairie View now. Coach Tremaine Jackson completed that first season, and they won their first SWAC title since 2009. All of the players were abundance, man. I sat down with all these guys, the top guys that they had at Media Day last week in Atlanta. It was a pleasure to sit and talk with Josiah Rockwell, man. First team all SWAC receiver, 1,000-yard receiver. Trevor Randall, man, could have really been up there for SWAC Defensive Player of the Year at safety. Led the SWAC in a lot of, he was up there in a lot of categories, in tackles. Chase Bingaman, freshman running back, getting second team. Eric Zachary, pretty good defensive back, man. Malik Gutaki. This team was really, really strong, man. And you look at the way it was, they were, 10-4 overall. And, it was just one of those type of deals, man, where, they had a 21-0 lead there in the Celebration Bowl. And then, South Carolina State came roaring back. But you look at everything in their schedule, man. And it's funny that, Emmett, you talk about Cam Peters. I want to mention just a little something real quick, man. So I asked Cam Peters specifically when I talked to him on Friday. I asked him about that game against Texas Southern. I asked him about how you navigated those guys down the stretch on that last drive, right? They had to travel 92 yards. That drive started when they were backed up to the 8-yard line by a holding penalty, right? They also, threw the ball down the field. But if you remember, they were flagged for offensive pass interference that moved the ball from the 2-yard line to the 17. And then he said, he goes to the sidelines on a timeout. And, the coaching staff asked him, they said, well, what do you like? And he said, well, let's go empty. And he said that when he threw the touchdown to Rodney Ojo on that back shoulder pass, he said that the linebacker who was supposed to be blitzing but got lost in his assignment ended up covering Rodney Ojo, end of story, touchdown. But then I asked Trevor Randall, I said, what was the game that turned the tide for you guys? He said it was the UTRGV game. He said because when they lost that game to those guys, they fell down 17-0. And they ended up coming back and, still losing. He said that's what got their attention because they realized that they weren't doing the things that they needed to do as a group to live up to their potential. And when you talk to Tremaine Jackson, he's like, look, we didn't play up to our potential really the whole season, which is scary. He said we didn't play a complete game the whole season, which was scary. But you look through the thing, man. I mean, they won those tough games that they needed to get done. That game against Alabama State, that was another one of those, nip and tuck, go anywhere games. And the game they played against Jackson State to win the SWAC title game, obviously, it was something that will live in infamy, will live in history for those guys. So despite how it ended, this was a strong season, and I love what Tremaine Jackson has with these guys moving forward. So you can talk your thoughts about Prairie View, man.
Oh, yeah. Coach Jackson is a fiery coach in the most positive way possible. And his mantra is that he does not argue with children. So he has non-negotiables, and he's not going to argue with you if you're on your mother's phone bill, if your mother is paying your tuition, or your father's paying your tuition, or if you're still in your mom and dad's house, which means that everybody who's on his team, he's not arguing with you. And so if you want, you're either going to put up or shut up. And that is how you change a culture quickly. You get the guys in that are going to listen, and you get the guys out that aren't. And then everybody that's listening, they're listening and going in the same direction. And so that's how he was able to basically shift the entire paradigm for them throughout this year. And so I love talking to Coach Jackson, before we did that game versus Southern. And you could feel what they were doing, because this means a lot to him, because he's from Houston. He's from the area. He's from Acres Home. Like he said, if it wasn't for a coach coaching me, I don't know where I would be. And he wasn't saying that cliche. He was saying that in all seriousness. Football is what has got him to this point. It's kind of helped him get to this point. And it was a football coach who helped him get to this point. And so you think about Cam Peters, and getting back to that quote about not arguing with children. Cam Peters wins the game, and he's benched.
Yes.
That's one of the best stories of football. I don't care, FCS, FBS, anywhere. You bench your starting quarterback because of how he was walking around the week in preparation for the next week, and he doesn't play for a couple weeks.
Correct. Tevin Carter did.
It wasn't just 1 week. It was a couple weeks. And Cam Peters realized, oh, this is what it means to be a starting quarterback. This is what it means to prepare in a way every single week, regardless of the outcome. This is what it takes to be the guy and be a leader. And then everything kind of shifts from there. Everybody takes the walking orders from the leader and the quarterback. And he has a stupendous game in the Celebration Bowl. We go back. They dominated Jackson State in that championship game. If we're going to keep it 100, we're going to be honest.
Yeah.
They dominated Jackson State in that game. From the beginning, JSU obviously is explosive. That's why they found a way to stay in the game. They're champions nonetheless. That's why Coach Jackson, he says, that's a good football team on the other side. But they showcased themselves throughout that game. Cameron Peters was fantastic. And then he comes back the next week, sets a Celebration Bowl record, more than 400 yards passing, does everything he can to make sure that team wins that ball game. I don't know how much we're going to get into that call at the end of the game on the fourth overtime. That you leave that up for the referees and for the officials. But Tremaine Jackson will be the first to tell you that they had other opportunities to win that game. And I'm that proponent, right? As much as you could maybe argue that final call, they had a field goal to win in the second overtime. They had the field goal early in the game that they missed. They had the 4th and 15 that they gave up. They had some of the 3rd and longs that they gave up defensively. And so, South Carolina State made the plays they had to. But Prairie View A&M, there's no way around saying that they weren't one of the best teams in HBCU football this year. They showed it throughout the year. And again, somebody had to lose that Celebration Bowl, and it just happened to be them.
Yeah, and the sky is the limit for these guys. Won 10 games. You trust me, trust and believe. These boys will be definitely heard from coming up ahead. All right, so that is Prairie View, and then we've got a couple more things that we're going to show you. But here, I'll just show you the final standings as it was. You saw that Jackson State, they won the East, and you saw how it landed. They were finished 9-3 overall, and then you saw Alabama State, and then you saw Prairie View with the gold star in the West. All right, so everybody, make sure you like the stream as we get into now James Hadnot's superlatives. So first off, man, you called so many games. You went around all these different places, man. What was the best game day atmosphere? Or you could say best game day atmospheres, whatever you want to say on that.
Yeah, best game day atmosphere. I love the game day atmosphere at Southern homecoming. There's nothing like a homecoming game, and so that was super fun this year for me. I mean, a lot of the other games this year early on, obviously Jackson State in the season opener, coming off a SWAC championship, first game of the year. That was unexpected for me. I got moved up onto that game. I was getting ready to go somewhere else, and so by getting moved up and kind of getting into that space. That was super fun. The Vet was very loud. It was a tight ball game. You could feel it. And then obviously, best game day atmosphere as well as best game that I called this year. It has to be the Las Vegas Classic, to be completely honest, right? That game was insane. 30,000 people there. They filled the lower bowl at Allegiant Stadium, and the game lived up to it. Grambling, Jackson State, Jacobian Morgan has a great start to the game. Jackson State looks great. And then Grambling, they block a punt. They go up in the game in the third quarter. Nate Rembert does Nate Rembert-like stuff. I'm a big Nate Rembert fan. He's a ball player.
Me too, man.
He's a guy. He really is a guy. And so, Jared Lockhart comes. Their storylines galore. The freshman comes in, and he plays super well late. You have a guy who, is the second string kicker who just has his jersey on. Doesn't even like he has on shoulder pads, kicks the game-winning field goal. It was just nuts, to be completely honest. And so that, to me, was the best game that I called this year. And interesting stories from the year. I mentioned the Cedric Thomas story about the puzzle piece. That's one of my favorite stories from the year. Marcus Harris III. He plays for Alabama State, and he ends up having 3 rushing touchdowns in that game versus Florida A&M. And he was a second-team all-conference preseason, I think, 2 years ago. But last year, with Jamari Kirkendall coming in, and Kirkendall and their second-string running back a year ago escapes me. He played at Clark Atlanta, but they played really well last year. So Harris falls down the depth chart, but he doesn't pout. He's a player's player. Like he's a big time teammate, doesn't pout. And then the next year, Kirkendall, has a good year. Legion's playing quarterback, but who has all the touchdowns versus Florida A&M on the road in the SWAC opener is Marcus Harris III. And he has 3 touchdowns in that game. So that was one of my favorite stories, just about his persistence and kind of staying and kind of steadying the course. Another fun story is that KJ Cooper, he has it's not necessarily godfather, but like his confidant, the person he looks up to, and his coach, quarterback's coach, mentor. That's the word I was looking for. Mm-hmm. His mentor is Donovan McNabb. And so the way that KJ Cooper got connected with Donovan McNabb is when he was a young quarterback. He was at a camp and was his dad was just trying to get him something to drink. And this is a quarterback's camp, so it wasn't a lot of black kids playing quarterback at the young age at this camp. And I think he said DJ Lagway was there as well. But this man sees him as a young black man and a young kid and is like, hey, you're playing quarterback? And he was like, yes. And so he said, I'm going to make sure that we get you guys connected with somebody. And that guy was Donovan McNabb. And so Donovan McNabb has been a mentor to KJ Cooper and kind of helping him through the ranks. And KJ actually moved to Arizona to play his high school senior season. And obviously Donovan McNabb lives in Chandler, Arizona. So they were able to stay connected there, really get really close and kind of move forward. So, I mean, there are just so many different stories that I could kind of tell from this year that kind of really stuck out to me. But those are some of the ones that I really liked. And that Cedric Thomas story is really one of my favorites because that the puzzle, the framework kind of coming together is really one of my favorite stories that I have from the year.
Yeah, man, that's some awesome stuff. And you took me back, man, with that best game you called, man. That game, that Las Vegas Classic. Oh my gosh, man, the way it was down the stretch, like the 4th and 9 conversion. I mean, and I mean, it had it all, man. I mean, shout out to, ZT said, hope he's, We're praying for his recovery. You know, you had the whole atmosphere go low with that. And then just everything after that. I mean, it was a lot, man. So yeah, awesome stuff, man. So now we get into, ladies and gentlemen, Wild Wayne's ride tokens for the year. Okay. Now I'm just gonna say this. I have this by positions. So I'm gonna tell everybody that the way I did this was I picked 2 players from SWAC and 2 players from MEAC. So if you're feeling slighted, charge it to my head and not my heart. All right. So we'll start with the quarterbacks, man. And I feel like these were the 4 obvious dudes that you could choose. Now, honorable mention, Cam Peters. Love Cam Peters. Cam Peters, if I had a 5th token to give out, Cam Peters would get my 5th token because he was that doggone good, right? Andrew Body, SWAC Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, goes without saying, man. Dude, when he was in there, this dude was just running things. Like, it wasn't even just he was getting it done passing. Dude was running the ball, right? Walker Harris, we know about Walker Harris being, North Carolina Central. You know, he was the MEAC Offensive Player of the Year. You know, over 3,000 yards passing, 24 TDs, led them to an 8-4 record. We talk about Jacoby and Morgan. You look at these numbers, man. This is from missing, really 5 games if you really think about it, right? Second team all SWAC with these numbers. This guy was on his way to having a dominant season. And then also we talked about Billy Atkins. Shout out to him, man. He did the dirty work to get these boys down the stretch, winning the MEAC. And, he was injured in the Celebration Bowl, but he had a tremendous season transferring over from James Madison. So, hey, any issues here with the 4 guys chosen?
We're good here. Andrew Body was a man amongst boys. At one point in time, he was leading the SWAC in passing yards and rushing yards. He, at one point in time, led the entire FCS in passing efficiency. And so, no question. These are the guys for your QBs this year.
All right. Now we move to my running backs. And this one was really tough. Okay. So listen, this one, I picked 3 guys from the MEAC because I kept trying to find who would be that second guy from the SWAC. And honestly, man, I could not leave Chris Mosley off this list. It was really tough. It was between Chris Mosley and Jalen Jennings of UAPB. Okay. That was what it came down to. All right. But I went with Ahmad Miller, obviously, 165 rushes, 1,054, first team all SWAC. Dude was a dog. He was a dog. Marquise Gillis and James Jones, man, these dudes, ridiculous. When you look at James Jones' numbers, 98 rushes for 958. That dude averaged almost 10 yards a carry, man. That is insane numbers. And Marquise Gillis, 1166, to lead the MEAC in rushing. And then Chris Mosley, man. Chris Mosley was a home run hitter. He missed the game and still had over 1,000 yards. So, any thoughts here on these running backs?
Only with a little SWAC bias, probably like you said, maybe a Chase Bingman, maybe a Trey Holly. Yeah. But you can't argue with the top rushing attack in the entire FCS. And Chris Mosley, again, as you said, that home run hitting ability, waiting his turn behind Jamari Taylor and now getting his chance, well-deserved for sure.
Yeah, like I said, James Jones, man, almost 10 yards a carry. That is insane, brother. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But all right, now we move to the receivers. Okay, and now I went the other way here. I went three SWAC and one MEAC. Now I got Nathan Rembert. Now it was between Nathan Rembert and Chauncey Spikes of North Carolina Central. That was what came down to my last ride token. The reason why I gave Nathan Rembert the nod is because Nathan Rembert made all of the big plays, and it was in key moments in situations. And for all my Jackson State fans that are still watching the stream, man, you know that this guy, if you don't have Nathan Rembert, there's some games, I'm serious, there's games you might not win because this dude was big, right? Jalen Jones was just a stud the whole season for Alabama State. Leading the SWAC in receiving, 1,167 yards, 9 TDs. And then you see Jordan Smith, he balled out. He had, 1,096, 4 touchdowns in the Celebration Bowl. And Josiah Rockwell, I forgot his line there, but I know his line was, he had 75 catches on the year, and he surpassed 1,100 yards. All right. So these 3 dudes, they were, the end 3 dudes, definitely no brainers. But like I said, Nate Rembert, I had to go with him because he was just clutch.
Rembert is the guy. Going back to what he did with Mississippi Valley State, going into Bragg and winning that game 2 years ago at Mississippi Valley State, he put everybody on notice on who he was and what he could be. Because to get 1,000 yards at Valley is just a crazy number. Jalen Jones, he's an All-American in all of FCS.
Yes, sir.
Disputed. Second team All-American. So he's not just one of the best, like I said, when we were talking about Alabama State, he's one of the best in the country at his position. Josiah Rockwell made huge plays in that Celebration Bowl, and Jordan Smith made all the plays in the celebration.
He did all the plays.
Yeah. So these I have no gripes with this list.
All right, that's the receivers. Now we go to the big boys. I know you have 5 starters on the offensive line, but Wild Wayne does 4. We get 4 ride tokens. Okay, Roger Big Baby Smith, you got to be on here when you're the MEAC lineman of the year, right? Big Cam Smith, man, the road grader from Alabama State, anchoring that line, man, at the tackle position. That dude has a chance to get drafted, right? First team all SWAC. Then we go DeAndre Towns Blue, man. Jackson State, first team all SWAC. Again, Justice Johnson, man. Again, when you have that big of an offensive output running the ball, you can't do it without a great offensive line in front of you. And Justice Johnson, he was their best offensive lineman. So these are my 4 guys, man, at offensive line. So we did go 2 SWAC and 2 MEAC here.
Yeah, definitely good here. Got to have Johnson because like I said, if you have the best rushing attack or one of the best rushing attacks in the country, have to have a guy from there. Same with the SWAC in regards to the rushing attack. And so we are definitely good here.
Yeah. All right. And, again, charge to my head, not my heart, man. I didn't put any tight ends list together. But if I did have a tight ends list, it would be Trayvonte Abner at Alabama State, Trayvon Jones of Prairie View, and then I'll think of the others, but I know 2 of them definitely. All right, so that's offensive linemen. All right, now let's go to defense. Now this one was stiff competition, man. Very stiff competition. Quincy Ivory, no brainer. He was no brainer. Okay. SWAC defensive player of the year. You look at those numbers, man. 71 tackles, 14 TFL, 6 sacks. And his numbers really could have been even better than that, right? Then you got Mike Lunds, South Carolina State, man. 45 tackles, 19 TFLs, man. 9.5 sacks. First team all MEAC. Now, this one was between Warren Robinson or Bryce Cage. If I could put both of them on the screen, I'd have them share the 3rd spot. I went with Bryce Cage because, man, 15.5 TFLs and 5 sacks. I mean, you heard Bryce Cage, tackle made by Bryce Cage. Bryce Cage with the stop. Bryce Cage with the quarterback hurry. So with him and Robinson, man, both of you guys could have shared this. And then Thomas Johnson. What can you say about this guy? Look, 49 tackles, 18 TFLs, and 12 sacks. No brainers. What do you think about this list? This was a tough list for me to compile, man. What do you think about this one?
We got to. I'm gonna wait and see because you got to have Kelby Givens at a linebacker position. If he's not a linebacker, then
no, he was one of the guys that got edged out here. He was one of the guys that got edged out. It was tough.
That's
was
tough
tough.
to have him on this list as he, just for what he's done over the course of the year. Obviously, team success is important, but that's probably the only one where it's hard. It's anytime you're talking about HBCU defensive line play, it's hard to leave Kelby Givens off any list. But that would be my only gripe there.
Yeah, I get you. So you probably would switch him with who? Bryce Cage?
Potentially, or let's see. Then, like you said, then that's always the question, right? Who are you taking off? And it's a debate on who you be taking off because, like I said, Bryce Cage, his numbers are staggering, and Thomas Johnson numbers are really good as well in regards to tackles for loss and sacks. So, yeah, that'd be tough. Yeah, like, you'd have to add a fifth head for
yeah, I'd have to have a fifth one. Like I said, this one was hard, man. This was the toughest one I had to go through.
Yeah,
because there are so many dudes that were deserving to be on here. And yeah, Givens didn't underperform, man. It was just hard for me. I mean, I went with Bryce Cage because I felt like Bryce Cage, there were games where there were games that he helped them just really get done. So, but we'll see, man. But shout out to everybody in the defensive line group. Now we go to the linebackers. Okay. I spent a little bit of time here, but ultimately I decided on these guys because I felt like we got a good group here. Reed Pulliam, coming back, man. He had a really good year for Jackson State. First team All-SWAC, 74 tackles, 10 TFLs, 2 sacks, and he had a whole lot of hurries. Jordan Franklin for South Carolina State, man. This dude, he was an unsung hero for them too at the linebacker spot. 62 tackles, 12 TFLs. He had 2 sacks, a lot of hurries. The dude of all dudes, Eric Hunter, Morgan State. Look at that. Triple digits in tackles. 14 TFLs and 4 sacks. Enough said, man. First team all MEAC. Stamarion Edwards, he got my last nod because of the fact that he led the SWAC up there with tackles. 87 tackles, 9.5 TFLs. And the dude, he just did it all. He was asked to do a lot, and he did. He shouldered a lot of the load. So, linebacker group, man, what do you think?
We're good here. Stamarion Edwards, Coach Thomas believes he's going to play at the next level. We obviously both believe Eric Hunter is going to play at the next level in some capacity. Reed Pulliam, leading one of the best defenses in the SWAC, and then Jordan Franklin leading the Celebration Bowl defense or Celebration Bowl winning South Carolina State defense in the linebacking space. Only other one I think of maybe Denarius Hilliard at Arkansas Pine Bluff,
right?
Who was one of the top tacklers in the conference as well. So just kind of showing some Pine Bluff some love with Denarius Hilliard.
Yeah, it was my last spot was between Stamarion and Denarius. Actually, that was between them two. So again, if I had 5 spots, Denarius Hilliard, you would get that 5th token. All right. But yeah, Eric Hunter, man, that's scary. Triple digit tackles for a team that won 4 games. All over the place. All right. Secondary. This one was not hard for me. This was easy for me. Tashawn Sims was a dude for Alabama State, right? He was one of the bright spots that they had on that defense. Dude had 36 tackles and led the SWAC in interceptions. 5 interceptions, first team All-SWAC. The top guy, the MEAC Defensive Player of the Year, Jared Dub Washington, right? It's just simply put, man, teams just stopped throwing on his side. 33 tackles, 22 pass breakups. 2 interceptions, okay? Defensive Player of the Year, MEAC. Jelani Vassell, North Carolina Central. He led the MEAC in interceptions. 57 tackles, which 57 tackles is pretty dope for a corner. And then 5 interceptions to be first team all MEAC. And then Trevor Randall, right? Ultimately, he ended up having 99 tackles when you put in his numbers from the Celebration Bowl. He had 3 interceptions, 2 sacks. This guy did it all too. This is a great group. So you got 2 safeties on the ends, and you got the 2 corners in the middle. This is a scary group, isn't it?
This is a stud group, and Trevor Randall is probably my most underrated defensive player in HBCU football because of the way that Prairie View A&M plays their defense, sometimes with 3 down linemen, and he's kind of like he just kind of finds the football. He can cover, he can tackle. You see, he has 99 tackles. They funnel everything to him defensively, and so he is one of those guys that, like, again, he's a little undersized, but he can play some football. There's a reason why they funnel everything to him, because he makes the tackle every single time. He is a menace. He can cover. And obviously, Jared Washington, it's a no-fly zone when he's on the field. So this is another great list. These are some great guys.
Man, this is a scary group to go against. You try to complete some passes against these four. That's wild. But yeah, man. So that is my groups, and those are my ride tokens for players. And last but not least, we got to do the coaches.
There we go.
The coaches, man. We got 4 of them. All right. This was a stiff competition towards the back end. Obviously, you got your 2 winners with Chennis Berry and Tremaine Jackson. That's easy for those 2. The jobs that those guys did to get their teams to win their leagues. They were both conferences coaches of the years, and also they won their titles, led them to the Celebration Bowl. Now here's where it got tough for me. Okay. Shout out to TC Taylor, because I believe he did a fabulous job, because there's a lot that he had to manage. Okay. So please know that TC Taylor is definitely deep in my heart, because I love TC Taylor. But I had to go with Deshaun Jackson, because Deshaun Jackson, everybody knows, man, nobody expected Delaware State to be good at all. And they went 8-4 and had their first winning season in 12 years. And then you got Coach Eddie Robinson. I had to go with Coach Eddie Robinson, because they went 10-2, man. And again, this is another team where, he had some turnover, and he also had to navigate through a difficult situation with a quarterback situation. They went 10-2, man. He did a phenomenal job with that team, right? Because from where they were picked, they weren't necessarily picked. Nobody really thought that they were going to be 10-2 good. Okay. Obviously, with Andrew Body, it was still a little bit of a wait and see to see what it would be. But the last spot was either Eddie Robinson or TC Taylor. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say that I gave it to Eddie Robinson, because TC Taylor led those guys where they were expected to be, which was hosting the SWAC title game. Right. But Eddie Robinson, he did some things with that group, and he got more out of them than what you probably would have expected. So your thoughts on my coaches group, man?
Yeah, this was going to be tough too, right? Because with Coach Robinson not getting to that SWAC championship, people could say, well, he didn't win. His team didn't get there. TC Taylor beat them. But that would be the only potential switch. But for Coach Robinson, this team was right there. It came down to one play, a sprint out to the left, and, do I like the play call? That's to be discussed, at a different time. But they Jackson State made the play they needed to make in regards to kind of that space. And that ended up, ultimately being the difference in the season. But overall, it was an extremely successful season for this team. They went down and they smacked Florida A&M in that game. They were extremely competitive versus Jackson State, and they beat everybody else. You know what I'm saying? They beat that Prairie View A&M team that played for the Celebration Bowl. And so that also has to mean something as well, because PV beat Jackson State. So definitely happy with Eddie Robinson being in this list. Same with Deshaun Jackson. Nobody knew what they were going to be, and there weren't very many high expectations for them. And all they did was play for, a MEAC crown. There's no MEAC championship game. They played for a quasi MEAC championship game here, and they just could not beat the champs in South Carolina State. So I definitely like this list as well.
Yeah, man. So that is everything that we have, man. We went through this thing in a couple hours, man. What a season it was. And also, not to be outdone, I don't want to leave off. I just want to say a few things real quick if we can. North Carolina A&T were 2-10 this year. Hampton was 2-10. Tennessee State was 2-10. All right. For these teams right here, Sean Gibbs, keep working, brother. You know, look, it's tough. It's tough playing some of these teams, man. But you know, they had quarterback issues and situations. Continue to keep working. For Hampton, we talked about it earlier. They got a brand new coach with Van Malone, so we'll see what he does. And then, like I said, with this team right here, you know Reggie Barlow is going to get these boys rolling. If you wanted to beat these boys, you needed to get them now because he came in late, and now he's going to have a full cycle to get his recruiting, hit that portal. These guys are going to be just fine, all right? But real quick, man, on the three teams that I just mentioned here, you know, as we get ready to close out, real quick on A&T and Hampton and TSU.
Well, love Sean Gibbs, covered him at Fort Valley State, firmly believe in his ability to build a program. So I'm excited to see what they can do. And you mentioned for Hampton and you mentioned for Tennessee State, right? Tough leagues to play in. So can these new head coaches and Coach Malone and then also for Coach Barlow, can they do what's necessary to compete in their leagues? And you firmly believe that they're going to be able to do that. So only time will tell.
Yeah. So as we get ready to close out here, man, so you talk about all your travels, you talk about everything. So what's next for you in the off season?
No off season, right? I did a HBCU basketball game, did A&T versus Howard at Cameron Indoor. I think that was last week. So that was super fun. Basketball starts in 2 weeks. We'll be HBCUGo basketball. I'll be in Daytona for Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M on the basketball court. And we roll right through, you know, the HBCU basketball season. So I'll be there. I'll be in Tallahassee for a game, do some D2 basketball. SWAC tournament is just on the horizon in a couple of months. And so we just keep it rolling. We move from football to basketball. And now, you know, we're excited about that. We're excited to see what, you know, Coach Ward can do at Florida A&M. You know, what can Coach Theus do at Bethune-Cookman, Donovan Jackson at Alabama A&M. So, or excuse me, Dante Jackson at Alabama A&M. So the time is now. Coach Prairie at Grambling State, you know, coaches in new places and everything like that. So I'm just ready to go with basketball and you know, and then Coach Williams at Jackson State. So we got some great coaches in this league. Some great basketball is about to commence in conference play starting in January. So, you know, we're going to rock on with that.
Yeah, well, football-wise, man, I'm going to try to get with you in August, man, so we can do a preview. Because we did a recap, we got to do a preview.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as exhaustive as we have been, man, tonight, I hope everybody enjoyed what we presented for you tonight. I hope everybody likes the stream. And James, man, this was such an awesome show, man. I love this time, man. I love talking ball with you. Love talking just everything that we covered tonight. So, hey, everybody out there, enjoy your Christmas time. And for James Hadnot, I'm Wild Wayne Cartwright, man. James, you know, we'll be back before too long. So, you know, football might be over, but guess what, man? The HBCU pride and the love still goes on.
Always.
Always.
Have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year, and we'll see you in the new year.
Absolutely. Peace, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on the ride with Wild Wayne Cartwright. As you exit the ride, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit the like button, and catch up on all of our prior episodes. Until next time, God bless.